So Heather, tell me about your leadership style 5 years ago, and tell me about your leadership style today.
No,
So
you
I know
didn't.
there's a change, but walk us through that.
Okay,
And what's the difference?
Okay. First of all, it's more than 5 years ago. And second of all, I can't believe you're doing this to me on camera. Okay, so basically what you're asking me is how has my leadership style grown? And what is the major contributing factor to that? I get where you're coming from. And yeah, you know what? It's one of the things that I've actually used to mentor other leaders in HR over the last, we'll say 7 years, 6 years maybe. And it's relational. And you're absolutely right. I will use this term and then I will deny it. I am a stone cold HR professional normally. And that was definitely my style. So I grew up with the mindset that HR definitely is the non-emotional concept of a business leader. So the one that you go to that is there to listen to your emotions, the one that's there to be able to handle the hard conversations, the conflict mediation, resolution kind of concept, the one who's there specifically to handle terminations, right? And performance management and PIPs and those kinds of things. So really a lack of your own type of emotions and engagement and involvement so that you can step back and be able to be that side, right? And so I grew up that kind of old school way of HR, and it served me well in my career to a point, and I've had many jobs that way, but I've learned in the last few years that relational HR is much more important.
So before you move on and talk about the change there, what was a negative of how you led then? What was a negative there?
I would say probably, wow, this is definitely out there, isn't it? Vulnerability 101. All leaders should have it, though. I guess what was the negative is it definitely made you unapproachable.
Yeah,
as a leader. And you don't even realize it, right? So you were the person people went to when they had to, not because they wanted to. They didn't come to you for coaching as much as they came to you because it was time to get the job done. Yeah.
So as you every now and then maybe look back at that area of your job life, do you see moments where you're like, oh yeah, I kind of see how that wasn't where people came to me because they wanted to, they had to?
Yeah. I can see it now. At the time, no.
Absolutely
not. At the time, I'll just might as well say it. So when you have that style of leadership, you're driven off of the power. And you may not realize it, or you may not even want to admit it to yourself, but when you are an unemotional or a non-empathetic leader, you are driven off of power and control.
Yeah.
And you may not realize it, and some people who are going to listen to this are totally going to be offended by what I'm saying, because they don't want to admit it, but it's true.
Yeah.
100% true. And that was me, right? So not because I needed the control over everyone else, but I was controlling myself and my job.
So now let's talk about transition. How did you start changing that? So how did you change that?
I went to work for an organization where the VP, my immediate supervisor, had the craziest concept of my starting. So the VP said when I first started, he said, I want you to spend the next 3 months doing nothing but meeting and greeting and having coffee with people. And I thought he was insane. I'm not going to lie. I am the type of person who wants to come in and make an immediate impact in an organization because of my style of leadership. And because that's why you hire me, right? You bring me in so I can show you what I can do, right? Yeah. I want to show you why you pay me you pay me. And for me to sit back and to build relationships and to have coffee with people and learn what they do was foreign, an absolute foreign concept. And so I absorbed it and I said, okay, I can do this. And for the first week or so, I could do it. Yeah. And for the first couple of weeks, it started to get uncomfortable. And I kept wanting to dive into things, and he kept pulling me back out of things. And every one-on-one, the first question he would ask me is, how did it go this week? And it wasn't, what did you accomplish, or what projects, or what roadblocks, the things I'm used to, right? It was, how did it go, and who did you meet? And how are those conversations and relationships coming? And it was such a foreign concept.
Well, in on that, because I had the experience to watch you go through that as that transition started, right?
It was a holy terror for me.
Yeah, it was. I remember there were nights we would have conversations. You wanted to just jump in and move on and start with the handbook or this and that, but there was also a time and point, I think, 2 months in, where all of a sudden you got it. You're like, wow, I'm starting to.
It was humbling.
Yeah, because you really, when you say, I went and had coffee and build relationships, that's what you were doing for 3 months.
Yeah, literally.
I remember.
Not figuratively,
yeah,
literally.
I would ask you.
Having a cup of coffee, you know.
I would say, what'd you do
with
today?
people.
And you're like, I
drank
talked to
more
somebody.
coffee in a day than most people do in a week. Yeah, it was humbling when it finally clicked in my head what I was doing and why I was doing it. The organization that I went to work in was really, really broken and had a lack of trust. They'd went through a large number of leaders, especially in the HR realm, but overall leaders in that part of the organization. And the purpose behind me building those relationships that my boss was looking for was specifically because that trust was no longer there. Yeah. And they wanted to rebuild that. And the way to do that was to build relationships, right? Because once that connection, that human connection's there, it's much easier for you to bring them along into that transition of change that was necessary in the organization. And you know, we immediately went into having to do some really tough things. It was in healthcare, and it was through COVID, and we had to do a closure. And so there was a lot of really difficult things that came in the following years. And they were able to be accomplished in what I think a much more successful way because of the relationship building that occurred because of that, right? And so I learned a lot about my leadership style and changed probably the most I've ever changed in the last 20 years of my career in that time period.
So I'll add something to that. It was interesting when you left that job to move on how all those relationships, and quite a few yet to this day, even though it's been 4 years,
There's five.
You have some really tight relationships to that organization. So explain how you really feel your leadership styles changed, but how that's helped you in like the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. How that's really put you in this different spot. What's the biggest change and how's that really helped?
Yeah, so I've absolutely changed my entire leadership style for coming into an organization, first and foremost. When I come in, I step back, right? And I observe and I learn before I step in. And I walk into an organization, I let them know that. I let them know my strategy when I first start in an organization from the top level down, and I let them know my job is going to be to observe and understand my peers as well as my team as well as the organization and the culture, so I know how to support the organization before I help transition into changing it, right? And that's how I build the trust in the organization to be able to help influence and make an impact inside of it for whatever's going on in the organization. And so it really has altered exactly how I work in an organization. It has also helped me build really, really tight bonds with the C-levels in an organization to help with some really tough transitions that organizations are going through, and really partner in a unique way to make sure that the employees inside of organizations are being thought of and listened to at the high levels when change is happening.
So I think what's really interesting is you've really used the mirror in a sense, right? You've been looking in the mirror on, hey, what do I have to do to build relationships? And you've been using the megaphone as well, right? Listening. And I think part of, from where I've sat and got to watch your transition, it's also self-awareness of what are the things I'm doing that are getting in the way from building those relationships, right? So I think as leaders, right, we understand that relationships matter.
Yes.
Relationships matter. Listening is the way you build relationships.
And that's how you build trust, which is
Exactly.
critical as a leader.
Yep. And then the third thing is self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Be self-aware in those situations where maybe you aren't listening, but be self-aware to change that there, not later, right? So that's awesome. It's been fun to watch, by the way, too.
Thank you. And I think the only other thing that I would add to that is humility.
Yeah.
As a leader, you absolutely have to be humble enough to listen to what others feel is necessary to grow and change. And I had been in my career for over 15 years by the time I took that role on, and successfully. And so to have someone tell me to change how I normally walk into an organization wasn't easy. And in doing it, I actually think that I have created an entire new set of skills that I didn't previously have that makes me even more successful. So I think sometimes just that vulnerability and humility as a leader is also critical.
And I agree. It's been fun to watch. Like I said, I think we'll end on this as leaders, and we'll talk about this more in another episode, but what I've seen is you understand it's okay not to be the smartest person in the room.
Yeah.
And not have all the answers, even as you're the leader. And I think that's important for us as leaders to remember.